We are extremely saddened by the recent passing of Phil Naro. Phil was an icon in the music industry and was immensely popular in the Western New York region as well as in Southern Ontario. Phil is widely known as the lead singer for Talus from 1983 to 1986, and they recently recorded a new studio record. He also played with numerous musicians, both locally as well as nationally. We reached out to two prominent musicians that were very close to Phil.
Guitarist Mitch Perry played with Phil in Talus from 1983 to 1984 and recorded the critically acclaimed Live Speed on Ice album. Buffalo Music Hall of Fame inductee Jim Crean grew up heavily influenced by Phil. They became fast friends and forged a strong relationship ever since, which has resulted in them writing over 300 songs together. Sit back as we reflect on the brilliance of this one-of-a-kind singer and songwriter. Phil loved music and performing, but on top of that, Phil was a caring and humble person with a big heart.
Mitch and Jim, thank you very much for joining us today. This is an episode I never really wanted to do, but thank you very much. We're going to pay tribute to Phil, talk a little bit about your experiences with him, and that. I guess we'll start with Mitch. Mitch, you played with Phil and Talus in 1983, released the amazing Live Speed on Ice record with Phil and Billy Sheehan and Mark Miller and Talus. Just tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Phil back then.
Well, obviously, it was a major change for me coming to Buffalo. I think I joined in November of 1983, and I came from Los Angeles. So talk about the proverbial fish out of water. I think I was at when I arrived there. And I mean, obviously, as you know, Talus was a pretty big deal in the Buffalo area. And Phil was really, 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 really down to earth, a really, really nice guy, and made my coming to Buffalo a whole lot easier. I mean, when I first got out here, I spent a lot of time with Phil, and he's, I mean, he's just one of the nicest people you could hope to meet. You all know him. I mean, he's as good a person as they come, and was a phenomenal musician. I mean, obviously, I joined Talus because of Billy Sheehan's reputation, but to get a band that had people of the quality of Phil and Mark, alongside Billy, it was just that much more incredible.
Yeah. What did you think of Phil as a vocalist? I mean, his vocals are absolutely incredible on that Talas record. I mean, you guys were all great musicians, and each guy held their own. But what did you think about Phil as a vocalist?
I thought he was great. I mean, he had phenomenal range. More importantly, he was a great front man. And I mean, singing obviously is a very important part of everything, but especially at that time, in music, the ability to carry a show was as important, and Phil had that in spades. He was always entertaining, and always kept the audience engaged. I think part of it was his personality. There wasn't a barrier between him and the audience. He really had a good connection with the audience, and I mean, that's all you can ask for, when you have someone fronting your band.
Yeah. Now, Jim, you were a huge Talus fan back then. Talus is one of your favorite bands. Tell me about how you got into Talus and what you thought about Phil.
I mean, Phil was, my biggest influence, right? At a young age, my high school band, we were fortunate to open for Talus, and that show, he pulled me aside, and he said, "Hey man, Phil, as Mitch was saying, Phil was just a great class act." And at that moment, he goes, "Hey man, I like what you're doing. Here's my phone number. Give me a call, and I can help you do some stuff." I mean, that's how cool he was, right? There's a kid in high school. I was like 15, and in my little high school band, and he just pulled me aside and was super cool. And because Talus at that time, they were the big shots in Buffalo, right? So these guys were the untouchables. Really, they were great. And the version with Mitch is just I mean, that carved my career. That album carved my career. And then, you know, so that was it. I gave Phil my number and in that, and I'm thinking, this guy's never going to call me. I mean, he's a major rock star in my eyes, right? And then like the next day he called me. It was crazy. And then he's like, come on down here. At that point, he was living over on West Ferry. He's like, come on down to my apartment and, you know, we'll see what we can do. Next thing you know, me and him are writing songs together, making demos, and it was just crazy. And that just shows the character of Phil, you know, and he did that with a lot of people. But with me, he took me under his wing, and, you know, then that was 40 years ago, geez. And for the last 40 years, it's just been me and him writing songs and recording and doing albums, and me singing on his albums, and just crazy, man. And I'm heartbroken over this. Devastated, man.
Yeah, it was definitely quite the shock, that's for sure. Joe, what do you have for them?
Well, so is that how you first, Jim, is that how you first met Phil, or did you actually meet him a little bit before that time, or?
You know, going to Talus shows. I mean, I was at one of the very first Talus shows with Mitch. You know, I went to tons of, you know, the 3-piece Talus, which I'm really good friends with Dave Constantino as well. And I knew Dave for a while, and Dave was super cool. And then when they announced this for 4-piece version, I was like, oh, who's these guys, right? So I was at one of the very first shows. You know, I had the sheriff's cards back then. I shouldn't be saying this on air, but I had the sheriff's cards. So, you know, and at that time the drinking age was 18. So now here I am, 15, right? But I had long hair, and I looked like I do, well, you know, 40 years younger, but I had the look. So they let me in. They did let me walk right in. And I played a lot of the clubs, so they knew me. So I got in there, and then all of a sudden Mitch comes out, and I'm like, oh my God, he just blew me away, because he came out playing the solo or whatever. And I have that show on video, believe it or not. And yeah, because back then no one had videos, right? So and then Phil just came out, and I was just like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? And really, that's what I've done for my whole life. So that was the first moment of seeing them, but I didn't meet them. And then, like I said, we were with Starstruck at that time, and so was Talus, booking agency, and Steve Simmons was remember Steve, Mitch?
Yeah.
So Steve was our agent, and they had Freddie, you know, because these guys were the big dogs. So, but I had Steve had us, and Steve called me one day and said, hey, you guys want to open up for Talus at September? So I'm like, do I want to open up for Talus? Of course. And that night, like I said, we got off our set, and Phil's like kind of like lingering around. And he goes, hey man, you know how Phil was. He goes, hey man, you got a really cool voice, you know. And then next thing you know, as I told the story, it was just it was incredible. And then I get a phone call from him the next day, and just floored. And then after that, it was just, you know, best buddies for life, you know.
Yeah, I remember seeing, well, I didn't see Talus, but Talus was supposed to be playing a show at the end of December 1983, and unfortunately Billy Sheehan couldn't make it. But I remember how nice, like, you know, we were walking around the club because Mitch and Mark and Phil were all there, and I couldn't, I mean, I was like 17, and I couldn't believe how approachable they were. I mean, Phil was so nice. He make you, and Mitch was talking with me. It's like, wow, I can't believe a rock star is actually cares about what a 17-year-old, you know, starstruck 17-year-old cares about. And they're all you know, great guys.
Uncle Sam's.
Yeah, Uncle Sam's, right? Yeah, and then they ended up playing a couple weeks later. Yeah, and blowing us all away. Yeah.
Then a live album came out, and forget about it, you know, because at that time, you know, you'd hear these guys, but no one had recordings of it, so you didn't really, you just remember what it sounded like being there, right? And then when the live album came out, I mean, I wore that. That's all I listened to. That's all I listened to.
I know.
The only album I listened to for that whole 1983, 84. I mean, that one album. And I said, this is how I'm going to sing and sound like, and this guitar player is going to sound like Mitch Perry, and no one's going to sound like Billy, but because no bass player really could do that. But every band I was in, I was like, this is how my band's going to sound. But no one could match Mitch Perry's licks, because Mitch had a killer sound back then.
Yeah,
so that band influenced every band that heard it.
Hey, Mitch, I always wanted to ask you this question about that time. How come you guys never went out on a major tour? I would think that, you know, you guys were really high. You think somebody like Iron Maiden or a group like that would have picked you guys up. Was there ever talks about that?
You know, I don't ever recall any of that happening. My best guess, without being able to say this is fact, is we could make a fair bit of money going out and doing what we did because we were a big enough band to go out and headline clubs and sell out fairly large places. And I'm sure there's no way we could have matched the money that we were getting by opening up for someone. And we didn't have that major deal. Relativity wasn't, putting tour support behind us to, so we could go out with a major. So, without, you have to remember, I was more the guitar player. It was Billy and Fred and Mike Faley who were all running the ship. So they would have the best answers for that, but that would be my assumption.
Yeah, you were really young too at the time. Weren't you like 19 at that time?
Yeah, I think I came when it was November of '83, so I was 22.
Oh, 22. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd actually flown out to LA when I was 18 to do my first album. And
What album was that? What album was that?
well, that was a record with a bass player, Alfonso Johnson. He's a guy from Weather Report who Jaco Pastorius replaced. And yeah, I was very lucky from the beginning of my career. I got some pretty great bass players to play with, Alfonso and then Billy. But yeah, we came, and Vinny Appice was actually the drummer on that project, who, it was on Jim's record that I just played on. But, I did the record with Alfonso, and then in true Welcome to LA fashion, found out what the music business was like when 2 weeks before they were going to release the record, a shift happened of major proportions at Elektra, which is where we were signed. And Joe Smith came in from Capitol, and he cleaned house with the A&R company, with the A&R department. And our A&R guy was one of the heads that rolled, and we rolled along with it. So from there, I ended up replacing Randy Rhoads in Quiet Riot, and went from that to play with Steeler, and was doing that when Billy had asked a gentleman named John Sutherland for recommendations on a guitar player. And it was funny, he asked John this question, I think the day after I had met John, and I had just heard Billy's bass solo off the first Talus album. So I was like in amazement of Billy, and was talking about that with John. And then the next day, Billy contacted him, and John put us together. And, I got on a plane in November of 1983, foolishly said, "Oh, I can't wait to see snow," and came to Buffalo.
Now tell us about the Live Speed on Ice album. Obviously, that's one of the career highlights, I feel, for Phil. How did that all come about? How soon in advance did you know you're going to be recording it?
This was the absolutely nutty thing. It was happening as I joined the band, and we rehearsed and we went out, and I believe the album was recorded on the 9th show we ever played together.
Wow.
And I can tell you with certainty, the only overdub I did was a solo on one of the songs where I'd broken a guitar string. So we fixed the solo, but that live album is pretty much what you see is what you get. I mean, there was no studio trickery or anything. Of course, Pro Tools didn't exist, but even then, everyone had their tricks and overdubs and go in and re-record things, and none of that happened with this record. I mean, I'm really, really proud of the fact that we were able to do what we did in such quick circumstances, and it came out really well. Another thing, I mean, I got to one of my songs, Crystal Clear. This is another, nod to just how great Phil is. It was a co-write between me and Ralph Morman, the singer from the Joe Perry Project, who'd written Let the Music Do the Talking. And Ralph has got to be, he's one of the golden voices of rock too. I mean, he had an amazing sounding voice, and Crystal Clear. It's funny because I didn't listen to the demo for many years that I'd sent Billy of that song, and Billy kindly, uh, amazingly enough, saved the cassette tapes from back then. I didn't even have a copy. Billy still had copies of it, and I listened to what we did, and I'm like, oh my God, Ralph sounds so amazing. And then I listened to how Phil, took that song and made it his own, when we did what we did. And, my hat's off to him, because it's hard enough to do that on anything that's someone else's. But when you're taking someone who's really at the top of the game and taking it, and moving the ball forward from there, that's a pretty cool accomplishment.
Yeah, the thing with Phil is that his voice was always strong, and I'm sure Jim, you can attest to this with working with him so many times. I mean, he always had his voice got better and better, it seemed, as the years went on.
For sure. I mean, it's funny Mitch said that, because we ended up covering Crystal Clear on one of my albums, Velvet Crush, that Phil produced. He produced the whole record, and in that session, his voice was so incredibly strong, and it was unbelievable just hearing him, the notes he can hit, and even up until recent, I mean, he still could sing hard like that, and he had a great, very strong voice, and you know what I loved about Phil, his voice was very original. You didn't go, oh hey, that sounds like this guy or this guy, or he's trying to sound like this guy. When you hear it, you distinctly knew it was Phil.
Yeah, that's a great point.
In that live album, nothing sounded like that. No band sounded like that. Whether it be, Mitch's guitar playing, his guitar sound was incredible. Back to Mitch on that, because his guitar sound was unbelievable. All the guitar players wanted that guitar sound. And then of course, Billy, he was very original. And even Mark's drumming, Mark's drumming was very original with the rototoms. A lot of drummers weren't doing that. And then we come into Phil. Nobody sounded like Phil. He sounded very original, and that's why that album should have went. If that album, I think, would have been a studio album, that album would have been the biggest album of the year. I think, because live albums at that time, everybody was scared of live albums, and like Mitch said, everybody overdubbed, and this was not overdubbed. This was a real live album. However, when you went to see Talus, that's what it always sounded like.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Phil's voice got better as he got older, for sure. And his songwriting got better too. I mean, me and him would write songs. He'd come to my house weekly from Toronto. He'd drive in from Toronto. He lived deep in Toronto, so it was like 2.5 hours away from Buffalo. He'd come in every week, faithfully, every Thursday. That was the deal. Every Thursday, me and him would get together and write songs or record them. And this went on for 10 years. 10 years every Thursday. Isn't that crazy?
It is. So how many songs do you think you wrote with Phil over the years?
It's funny you said that, because I was just kind of, reminiscing, how this whole thing just last year.
Right.
So I was going through, and I have so many demos and files, and probably how many songs I wrote with him, probably about 300.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
And then we've probably only released, we released 5 albums together. So 13, 40, about 50 songs. So I got about 250 songs still that are dear to me, and now they're sacred to me.
Yeah, are these songs that could be released possibly down the road? Or?
At this point, my head's not even there.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
I just want to, just remember him as the amazing, amazing vocalist that he is. But I do have a lot of material and a lot of great songs.
Right. What was it like working with him in the band? I know you were in a couple of different projects with him. I remember seeing you guys open, quite a few shows with Phil in the band. What was it like actually having him in the band? I mean, he comes across to me as somebody, well, I met him a few times. He always came across as somebody that really didn't have an ego and was very down to earth.
Exactly that, I mean, Mitch is the same way. I've gotten to know Mitch Perry over the last couple of years. He's the same way. I mean, these guys are just bred. I mean, and I always thought like this: if you're confident, you're a great musician, and you're confident, and you don't have to have an ego. You don't need the ego to compensate. And Phil didn't have to have an ego, because his voice, once he opened his mouth and sang, it blew people away. So Phil didn't have to have that ego. It just wasn't in him. It wasn't how he was raised. He was raised. His parents are unbelievable. His family unit's really, really, strong. So he didn't come across as arrogant to anybody. Like I said, he was very humble, actually. If anything, he was very humble. He'd ask me things like, hey, how's that sound? And, is that okay? After, I'm sitting there, in the studio with him going, holy shit, this guy just blew me away. And he said, is it okay? You like that? And I'd be like, yeah, it's great, So I learned that from him. I learned that the more success that comes with it, the more humble you need to be, and look at Mitch's biography. His career has been unbelievable. He played with some of the best, and he's very humble too. So I think if you're humble, and you let the music speak for itself, I think that's more attractive than trying to, be arrogant or whatever. So to answer your question, no, Phil was the most humble, kindest guy you'll ever meet in your life. And that's very heartfelt.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a bit of Clark Kent going on there because he was a pretty, pretty chill guy, very
Mhm.
humble, but then he'd get on stage and it was a whole nother animal.
Totally. Well, yeah, he put the persona. And the funny part about it, and Mitch is right. The funny part about that whole concept of Clark Kent, and that's great you said that because he's Superman Clark Kent. I got to know Phil so intimately that, like when, like he's human, we're all human, right? But on stage, you need to be more than human. And on stage, he blew people away. And you thought, wow, this guy's got vibe and vibrato, and he's just amazing. Like you have to have as a front man. And he taught me that. And so, I put that same front on, but there'd be times where we just talk about, whatever, what's on the news and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So there was that sensitive side of him, but you're right. Mitch is right. You need that Superman or else it just won't work. So he had both. He had it all, full package.
Yeah.
He had a great look. I mean, he looked super cool. He dressed cool on stage, great stage presence, great stage moves. He was a full package, and he can sing better than anybody I knew. So what more could you want for a front man?
Yeah. He also did a project with Peter Criss. Jim, do you recall him ever telling you any stories about when he worked with Peter Criss and giving you
Yeah.
feedback on what happened with that?
When he got that gig with Peter Criss. It was weird because he called me up. He goes, "Hey, guess who just called?" And it was Eddie Kramer got him that gig, the producer. And Peter Criss called him, and he had to fly to Redondo in California, Redondo Beach, and stay at his place. So he asked me, can I keep my car in your driveway? And I drove him to the airport because back then you used to have to pay for parking. I mean, we're talking early 90s, right? And it was expensive. And he was going to go for like 2 weeks. And he had just had his first son, Johnny. And so he was with Peter Criss. And this is a great story, and I wish Phil would tell it because Phil tells it amazing. But I'll give you my version of how he told it. So he said he was sitting on the couch one time, and he hears it sounds like metal coming through the living room. He's a real nice place on Redondo Beach. It's Peter Criss, right? So all of a sudden, Peter Criss is standing above Phil in full armor, like knight's armor, right? And he puts his sword in front of Phil and says, "What's the password?" And Phil's thinking, "What the hell's going on, man?" You know what I mean? And so that was like the beginning of the end of it. He said, "Oh man, this guy's a little different. I don't think I could work with this guy." Yeah. Do you ever tell that story to you, Mitch? That's a great story.
Yeah, I never heard that one.
It was great. So he called me, right? And he's like, "Hey, this guy's weird, man." He goes, "I got to get the hell out of here." And he did. And he flew back about a week later. And that, unfortunately, that was the end of that. But that's a great story. I always thought that was a funny story.
What time period was that?
That was 93.
93? Wow.
Yeah. And then it was sucked too because Peter just got the record deal right after Phil left with Phil's demos. So the demos that he sang on got them the deal, and then they got some other guy, ironically enough, named Phil, to do it. But Phil had just had his son, and he was like, you know what, it just wasn't meant to be. And they did a little touring with the Peter Criss band, but it didn't really materialize into anything, But
yeah, because he shortly after that he joined up with Kiss again.
Yeah. So, but I always thought that was and the way Phil tells us, obviously I told it not that funny, but the way Phil tells it was very animated. It was hilarious. It was a great story. So. you know, it's just Mitch, Phil told me great stories with you guys out on the road too. So I heard some great stories.
Anything you can repeat here?
No, the one well, let's just put it this way. How about the jacket? How about the fur jacket? We'll talk offline.
Okay.
The fur jacket. Think about that one. We'll talk about it. But yeah, a lot of great stories, and you know, and Mitch probably has better stories. Although I went on the road with Phil a lot too, so I got some great stories too. But I'm sure there's some great Talus stories. Mitch, you got anything good?
Oh, I mean, I experienced my first of a lot of things. I was in my first car crash with Talus.
Hmm.
We were driving back, you know, from Erie, you know, so you're on that two lane highway coming up. I don't know if it was 90 or whatever, but I'll never forget getting entangled. Obviously, like some semi had crashed before we had gotten on the scene, and it was pitch black out, and there were a bunch of telephone wires that had just come down, you know, because it took out a couple of telephone poles, and our car went spinning and got caught and all that stuff. But we all survived that. God, you know, it's so much happens so fast. I mean, you know, I didn't realize this. You know, obviously, there's been a lot of reflection in the last 24 hours,
Yeah.
and it really blows my mind that it really was a short period of my life. I think I was only in the band for about 8 or 9 months before I came back out to California. But the amount of stuff that we did, I mean, there were just so many gigs and you know, and funnily enough, it was all in the Northeast. We never really, you know, the first major tour that they wound up doing was with Yngwie, and I think that was the first tour they did after I left. So but everything I had done was regional, and there was just so much of it. It was like, I mean, it's hard to really separate a lot of stuff because it was just a never-ending stream of gigs. That's what I remember. A never-ending stream of gigs and a ton of in-stores, you know, and hanging out at Cougars in between.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are a hardworking band. I mean, for sure. In that band, and you know, it's funny too, because the whole Phil legacy was only really 2 years, from 83 to 85. And, you know, and I remember how, well, I shouldn't say that, because he did a version from 85 to 86, but it wasn't, you know, it was all just different guys. Basically, it was guys from Danger, right? So those guys.
Al Petrelli, Jimmy DeGrasso, Bruno Ravel were in Talus. Yeah.
But the band that really that forged it was, you know, that really influenced all of us was the Mitch version, that live album version. That was when they were firing on all cylinders. That band was just, it came out, it blew everybody away. And I was proud of Phil, because once I started getting to know him real well, you know, then it was like the idolizing thing went away, and that just became, I'm his friend, and I'm proud of him, and I can't wait to see him make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the whole thing was going to go. And then, you know, then John got in the band, and I was really good friends with. I'm still really good friends with Johnny. So when John got in the band, it was going really well too for him. Like Mitch said, they did the Yngwie tour, and they were real excited about that, because they came back and had a lot of good feedback, not knowing that, you know, Bill had accepted the offer with Dave. But you know, that should have happened and could have happened before that these guys even got in it. So thank God we got to see Mitch Perry and that version of Talus happen, because they were trying to court Dave in the 1980, or Billy on the 80 tour. They were trying to get Billy to join Van Halen. Did you know that story? Yeah. So if that would have happened, we would have never had Phil in Talus, and we never had Mitch and Mark.
Good point.
So thank God Billy waited on that offer and didn't do Van Halen, and gave us my favorite band ever. I mean, Talus that's my thing, you know. And anybody that knows me knows that I speak very highly of it, and in all my interviews, and I'm very proud to know Mitch Perry, and Mark Miller's a good friend of mine, and Johnny and Phil.
Yeah, Jim, although you never actually were in Talus, I kind of like consider you as like a fifth, sixth member of Talus because of the fact that you're so knowledgeable. And I mean, where can you go to a show and see a band do High Speed on Ice? I mean, you know, or Shy Boy. I mean, you guys, I've heard Hair Nation, your band Hair Nation, do it all the time, and you guys kill it.
Yeah, nowhere's near that band did, but we do an okay imitation of it. We opened up for, I played with Vinny Appice in Carmine
Yeah.
and that drum wars thing, and we did a show with Last Night, Vinny's other band, and Phil was at my show. He came to see me play, so we just do like when you open for these nationals, you do 45-minute set. But it was a little different because it's Vinny, so he gave me an hour set. And Phil was at the show, and I grabbed Phil. I said, "You're coming up and doing one with us." He goes, "No." Phil's very humble. He's like, "No, it's your show. You do it." I said, "No, you're coming up and doing it." He goes, "Well, what do you want to do? Like Zeppelin or something?" I said, "No. We're doing sink your teeth into that." And I bring Phil out, and like everybody, the crowd erupted. And it was a big crowd, and Phil came out, and we just God, it was goosebumps, man, because he came out and afterwards he goes, I'm gonna get with Billy and see if we can maybe do a reunion or something. So Phil was really happy about that. So that's kind of what really inspired the whole Talus as of late reunion. The knowledge of Talus is because I was around Phil all the time, and so I lived it. That version of Talus, the Mitch Johnny era it was my thing. That was my thing. But I love the 3-piece too. Don't get me wrong. That band was great too.
Absolutely incredible.
I just wasn't around it.
Yeah.
These guys I was around all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's great that that Talus record with Phil is gonna be released one of these days, and hopefully everybody in the world can really, really appreciate how amazing.
Mitch is on that too.
Yeah, Mitch, you're also on that record.
I am, I'm so glad, I mean, obviously a lot more glad today than even yesterday that I got to be a part of this. But as you mentioned earlier, we didn't record this stuff in the studio. And it's kind of neat that here we are almost 40 years later. And we took 2 of the songs that I had written, Crystal Clear and On the Take, and Billy asked if I minded if they did them on this record, and I said of course not. And they said, well, you should play on them. So it was wild, I gotta say. And I'm not just saying this for the sake of the show, but it was such a trip to play. Billy just sent me bass and drum tracks to Crystal Clear and On the Take. And we dialed in my guitar sound, and I started playing with the track the first time. And I mean, talk about a time tunnel. It was like, it felt like I was playing in Talus, and I'll tell you, I'm really, really curious. Obviously, I haven't been involved with any of the post production on the record, but I'm really, really excited to hear what we came up with when it comes out. And I'm glad that the world will get to hear this stuff in a proper way with Phil's voice framed properly, I mean, sonically, and it should be it'll be a pretty incredible record, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, guys. Joe, did you have something?
Well, I was going to ask Jim if he had any, final things he wanted to mention or say.
As far as Phil goes,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, most class act I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of people, and Phil just he gave it his all every time. He recorded, and every time he played live, and I'm really gonna miss him, and I'm sure the world's gonna miss him too. My selfishness says I miss him, and I'm heartbroken, but I think the music world is lost a great one. So that's. I'll leave it at that, and I miss him.
Right.
Well said, Jim. Mitch, what could you want to add?
Well, one thing, I'm 99% of the time, I am not a huge fan of social media these days. But that 1% definitely came through yesterday, in getting to see, when Jim mentions the music community really feeling a loss, I mean, I'm totally amazed and happy to see just how much respect and love Phil is getting from everybody. And deservedly so. And it's you know, he's. I've met a lot of people in my life, and there aren't a lot of people who you spend a ton of time who you have nothing negative to say about. Phil is one of them. I couldn't come up with a negative thing to say about him if I sat here and tried. So, that to me is even a more amazing accolade than mentioning what a phenomenal musician he was.
Yeah.
He was all around a really great human being. And like I said, this is go on to Facebook and just see what people have to say about him. It's amazing,
Yeah.
just how much love he's getting. And I'm glad to see it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys, Jim and Mitch. Thank you very much
Yep.
for your time.